We're going to start in Matthew 6 this morning. If you have a Bible, you can go to Matthew 6, 1 through 4. The text will be on the screen, but we are going to be in Matthew 6, 1 through 4 to start this morning. These are the words of Jesus Christ. It says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not even let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you for it." Now, I want you guys to think for a second about the past 20 years or so. Something has fundamentally changed in our culture and in our society, and it has to do with the rise of social media. Really, Facebook kind of took off about 20 years ago, and that changed the game for many of us. There's been many good things, but for most of us, we know that there are many negative things that come around it. One of the main things that it has done is people have now developed kind of entire personalities online and started doing things that they maybe wouldn't do, but they're driven by trying to gain a social media like, or a social media comment, or a social media share. What I mean to say is people have started living in some ways for digital applause and posting and sharing about it because of that. I know not all of you are on social media, and to those of you who aren't, well done, don't start, stay off it. But for those of us that are, you know what I'm talking about, where all of us, one of the reasons that you're on social media is you want to share things about your life. You want to maybe share updates about your kids or your grandkids. It's in some ways a digital Christmas card. Maybe you want to share things about what you've done. This past summer, for example, I gutted my downstairs bathroom. And when it was all done, I shared a big photo album kind of like, hey, look what I did this past week. This was the project I was working on. And there's really nothing wrong with that. It's, like I said, kind of a digital Christmas card year round. But sometimes, if we're honest, all of us and others can be posting on social media to try and find digital applause, to try and find personal validation and have others know how good of a person we are. Maybe have others tell us how good of a person we are. There's a type of video that goes around from time to time that you might see, if you've been on social media, you've seen. I saw one literally last night, not looking for it, it just came up. But there's this video where maybe someone sees someone homeless, and then the whole video is them going and buying like a cheeseburger and some fries and then going up and giving it to the homeless person. Maybe you've seen that. Last night I saw a video of a guy, he went up to a homeless camp, looked probably like it was California or something like that, and he was like giving out tents to homeless people. He's like, hey, do you need a tent? And they're like, oh yeah. And in the comments section, one of these people were like, you're such an angel for doing this. To which the guy was like, oh shucks, me? Okay. Because really, think about that for a second. I want you to think about those videos, but put yourself on the other side. You're homeless, you're sitting on the street, and you're hungry, and then all of a sudden this person comes up with a bag of food and a camera in your face and say, hey, buddy, here you go. Yeah, look how good of a person I am. Good luck. Now I got to share this with everyone. Like that's kind of weird, isn't it? That they're just sitting there minding their own business, and then a guy with a camera's like, you want a tent? I bet you really need it. I'm going to make you content for the internet. That's weird. And yet we all have seen it. Maybe at times we've struggled with it ourselves because these people doing it want digital applause. They want people to know what they're doing. And I've seen some say, well, this is how I pay for it and that kind of thing. It's still not asking the person, do you want to be a part of my digital ministry? Do you want to be a part of my digital footprint? I'm going to shove a camera in your face, and I know you're really hungry, and to get the food, you have to agree to be a part of the video. That's weird. So we can read Jesus' words in Matthew 6, 1 through 4, where he says, don't be like those who give to the needy and announce it with trumpets and be like, announce it with trumpets? Who would do that kind of thing? Like, who would go give an offering and announce it with trumpets? But church, can I just ask you, in the 21st century, is the trumpet the cell phone? In the 21st century, is the trumpet the social media account? Are we still just trumpeting our good deeds to be seen by others? Just now we do it for digital likes and digital shares and digital people saying how great we are. It'd be easy to look at Jesus' words and think, man, who's going to announce their giving with the trumpet? And then in reality realize that nothing has changed under the sun. So today we're going to continue in our series, The King and His Kingdom, looking at the words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to see his turning his attention upon financial generosity, specifically helping those in need. I want to start today just by kind of walking the text and breaking it down for us. In verse 1, Jesus says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others as to be seen by them. If you do, you will have received your reward from your Father. You will not receive your reward from your Father in heaven." So Jesus says, be careful, be wary, be alert, Jesus says, to not do your good deeds, to practice your righteousness, so to be seen by others. Now, Jesus has an assumption that you will be seen by others when you are doing good deeds. His caution is that you're not doing good deeds to be seen by others. Does that make sense? He desperately understands and wants his followers to be doing good things, but it's the heart behind it. One is living in such a way that God calls us to live, doing good deeds and walking out how God is calling us to live. And if other people take notice of that, great, to God be the glory. It's not about me, give the glory to God. Another lives a certain way, and if people take notice of it, it's like, oh great, look how awesome I am. Yeah, you can give the glory and honor to me. And Jesus says beware of this because on the outward, they can look the exact same, can't they? Only in our hearts do we know whether it's about us or it's about God. Only in our hearts do we know whether we're trying to have other people think of us to be better than we are, or we're trying to just give the glory and honor to the Lord. That's why Jesus says, be careful, be wary, because it is in your heart, and our hearts are deceptive at times. And he warns him, he says, hey, be careful, the Lord will not honor that kind of thing. There will be no reward in heaven for you, which is a clear point that Jesus makes here, that obedience to God brings with it reward. Jesus then goes in to tie in that when you're giving your alms giving, after verse 1, in verse 2 he talks about, so when you're giving to the needy, this was a specific type of giving that Jews had called alms giving. And it was different from an offering. It would specifically go to those in need. Maybe you've heard that phrase before. We call it benevolence giving. Alms giving was directly given to those in need, the hungry, the homeless, the destitute. So if you've given to Salina First Church of God, if you've ever given a dime here, a portion of that giving is set aside for what we would call benevolence or almsgiving, to directly help those in need, whether it's the homeless, the hungry, those in crisis pregnancies, those who have unpaid light bills or overdue rent. We're coming into heat season, and so we will be paying for a lot of people's heating bill to make sure that their heat doesn't get shut off in the middle of the winter. If you give to Salina First, whether you realized it or not, a portion of that money is set aside to almsgiving or giving to the needy. And Jesus says, directly connects the idea of being wary of the heart and seeking the praise of man for this and connecting it to your giving, helping the poor. He says, don't blow your trumpets as a way of announcing your generosity. Now, this is admittedly a weird thing to hear in the church. Like, don't blow your trumpets. Why? No one does that. But I want you to imagine for a second, this is the situation that Jesus had in some of the synagogues. I want you to imagine you're at a worship service. It's not hard. You literally are right now. And I want you to imagine Kevin Caper, who's one of our elders, he was standing in the back, and someone in need came in, and Kevin vetted the need and said, hey, this is a legitimate need. Now, Kevin brings a trumpet to every worship service because that's Kevin's job, to blow the trumpet. And so he just starts in the middle of the worship service blowing the trumpet loudly for all to hear. Now, I want you to imagine you're in the worship service, and you're a righteous Jew. And so you stand up, and you've got Randy here and Carl here. And they both love the Lord. And they want to make sure that this need is met. So the trumpet blows. And they both stand up, and Carl, being the superior athlete, comes along Randy, stiff arms him, shoves him back down, and sprints up to the altar to make sure that his gift is given because he's just that righteous and just that holy. Do you see how that would feel a little weird? Do you see how if the trumpet was blowing and you're trying to look good in front of your people, that you would want to stand up and you'd make your way to the street? So what was happening during this time is that if a need came into the temple, they might blow a trumpet and people would literally take off sprinting towards the temple. And the faster you ran, the more righteous you were. But they were running fast through the streets so that people would see them. If you shut your shop during the middle of the day, it's where's the shop owner? Oh, he responded to the trumpet's call. He's a righteous man of God. He's trying to give. He must really know the Lord. Jesus has a word for people that would do that. He calls them hypocrites. He says, you on the outside are trying to show yourself, look how righteous I am, but when you stiff-arm Randy back in the pew, we can tell that it's not really about righteousness, it's about you taking the glory and honor. He says, on the outside, you want to say, oh, I'm just here to help a need, brother, but when you're running through the streets, it's really about you, so that people would see you. And his caution to that is, be careful, because the only thing you'll receive if you do that is the applause you get from men. So whatever the men applaud you and say, wow, look how righteous they are, look how great they are, he says, be wary, because that's literally all you're going to get. But when you give, he then tells as Christians, so he says, juxtaposing that, there's this type of giver, but when you give unto the needy, I want you to give in such a way that your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. So you're not going to go through the streets with trumpets. You're not going to do it so people see you. I want you to give in such a way that your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. And if you've been around the church for any period of time, you've heard that phrase. But what is Jesus meaning here? I really think what Jesus is saying, I want you to give in such a way that your own heart doesn't even take glory for it. That it's almost hidden unto you. Not only is it going to be hidden unto the other people, but you're not even going to recognize it yourself. You're going to give in such a way that even your own heart doesn't become puffed up in giving out of your own pride. That you're going to give in such a way that your right hand doesn't even know what your left hand is doing, so that when you give, when you live generously, it's going to be unto the Lord and nothing else. Why? So that you will receive your reward in heaven. Because again, the heart is a tricky thing. Said in the first service how this whole series could basically be called Be Wary of Your Heart. Because Jesus is saying, just be careful. You want to be so careful with your heart that your right hand won't even know what your left hand is doing. So just give unto God. Don't give for the applause. Don't give for the cheers of men. Give back to God out of what he has given to you. And why we should be concerned of all that? Because there is reward in heaven for those who give righteously unto the Lord. Jesus' words have challenge for us. They call us to something as Christians today as we wrestle, what does it mean to be generous in the 21st century? Our first point of driving this home this morning is this. Jesus seems to be showing us what motivates us matters. What motivates us matters. Now, not just in actions of generosity, but in all things, our motivation matters. We all experience this every single year, whether you realize it or not, because every single year in January, you stand in front of the mirror and you're like, oh, Lord, this is the year I'm losing weight. And you spend $450 and you buy all the fresh produce and all the things, and you're like, I'm going to pack my lunches, I'm going to do so good, and you start doing it. And your motivation is to look better in front of the mirror. But what happens every February? You go, that was really vain. I should love the body God gave me. And also, I'm worried that the people at the Willow miss me. And so I'm actually kind of being selfish by packing a lunch. I should make sure that they're okay and support small businesses like a hero. And you give up. Because your motivation was really, I just want to look better, and that isn't motivation really that will last when it comes to getting healthy. Our motivation matters not just in giving, but in all things. And Jesus says that your motivation should be two specific things. First, obedience unto God. That if Jesus has called you to do it, Jesus has called you to say it, Jesus has called you to go there and do whatever, that you will go because you're being obedient unto him. And the second is that you will receive reward in heaven. He clearly ties direct obedience to you want to receive this reward in heaven. And so the right motivation for the Christian is being obedient to Christ and for our reward in heaven. And this is really important because what if we tie our motivation to what other people think of us, to what other people say about us, to what other people think about what we're doing? What if we tie our motivation for what Jesus has called us to, not to being obedient to him, but to the next social media like or share, the next shout out? If that is our motivation, we will chase that motivation all around, and it can lead us off where God has called us to do. Think about it like this. If God called you to set up ministry A, and you knew that that is what God called you to do, and you were supposed to minister to people just like this, and maybe one day you share it, and people are like, wow, that's really cool. You're a great Christian and doing all that stuff. And you're like, well, to God be the glory, but I am, I do what I do. No big deal. And then someone comes in with a comment, because everyone has a comment on social media, right? You know how I do it better. You really should be doing C. You'll have a fork in the road moment. God called you to do A. He said, go and do this thing, but now your motivation is going to be questioned because the applause and maybe even the money is telling you, I would give to you if you did C. I would support you if you did C. I think you should do C. And if you're motivated by what other people say, you're motivated by getting the next check, you're motivated by digital applause, then you will go from A and say, well, yeah, the Lord really called me to A, but the money's at C, or the applause is at C. And here's the dangerous thing. In 2023, what the crowd will applause for is often not of the Lord. So if you are seeking digital applause, it is going to lead you away from where the Lord is calling you to do. But if you say, God has called me to that, and if people applause, let him be getting the glory and honor forever. And if people boo, you say they booed Jesus first. But I am going to go where God has called me to do what God has called me to do, and say what God has called me to say. You are walking in him. What motivates us matters, because if your motivation is the applause of others or the approval of others, you will find yourself on shifting sand. It's why high school was such a wreck. Because we all wanted the approval of others, didn't we? If you're a high school student, I promise you in like 3 years, you're going to be like, that was the dumbest thing. These people were morons. And I sought out their approval. What you can do is build your life on Christ and say, if I'm approving to him, I'm actually going to live a life of value. But if you're seeking motivation from being cool, for what people will say about you on social media, you'll find yourself chasing that. And you might even find yourself chasing that directly away from God. Let Jesus Christ be your motivation. Let him being obedient unto him be your motivation. Our next point for us today is Jesus has an expectation of generosity. Remember verse 2 here. Jesus says, so when you give to the needy, that means there's an expectation of that, right? When you give to the needy, not if you give to the needy, not if all your bills are paid and you have some left over, not if you saw that person and you're thinking, hey, I want to be a good person today, not if, I need some new social media content, so I should give to the needy. He says, when you give to the needy, and then gives us the instruction of how to do it. Make sure you're motivated by me, make sure you're not doing it for applause. But the expectation is that you and I would live generously. Jesus says, if you're going to follow me, you are going to live generously. And when it comes to generosity, it can be hard to hear in our heart at times, especially in our economy currently in 2023. We are currently living in the most unaffordable housing market that this country has ever seen. Despite the tales that everyone wants to tell you about the 80s, houses cost 50 cents in a pack of gum. Interest rates are higher, rents are higher, wages are lower than ever before in this country, and it costs more to just live. Now, some of you are like me, and we locked in that 2% interest rate back in 2020, and we will never move because of it. But that doesn't matter, because the grocery store costs more. The gas pump costs more. Just to heat my house was like 60 or 70% more last year. Utilities cost more. And so in this economy, it can be easy for the Christian to say, Lord, be generous with what? How can I be generous right now? I'm pulled in every different direction. But remember what we've talked about. Jesus cares about the heart. I think sometimes as Christians, we actually think Jesus cares about the amount of money. Like he wants to start a ministry and he's like, boy, I hope Craig comes through because if he doesn't come through with that check, I don't know what I'm going to do. That would be ridiculous, right? So if Jesus doesn't care about the amount of money, why does he still call us to be generous? Because there's something that goes on in our heart. Jesus literally told a parable about this. He says, there's this woman that comes into the temple, and she walks up to the offering, and she gives the equivalent of a penny in the offering. And then there's these rich men that come in, and they give the equivalent of thousands of dollars. And Jesus says, I tell you that woman gave more than those men. And on our worldly minds, we say, no, she didn't, Jesus. But Jesus says, she gave out of her lack, and they gave out of her plenty. And she gave more. That there was something going on in her heart, that she was trusting God and stepping out in generosity, and there was something going on in the other people's hearts that they weren't stepping out and trusting God in generosity. And Jesus says it is about your heart behind it. Generosity was never about the amount of money. It's about the way you look at others and the way you look at what God has given you. Specifically, I think at times, generosity to those in need. I want to challenge you because it can be really, really easy to look at those in need and see someone having a terrible day and to think, get a job, dude. We've all thought it. You thought it, I've thought it. Let's just not lie about it and be like, Craig, I'm a Christian. I would never. Yeah, you have. Every single one of you said, McDonald's is paying $28.50 an hour. Go get a job, bum. And if you haven't said it, you've thought it. I just want to challenge our hearts in that. Do you think that represents what Christ would call us to? To not see someone as a person, to not see someone as someone in need, but to rather be annoyed by the fact that they're in need. And yet Jesus here says, hey, when you're giving to those in need, when you're walking with those who are in need, I'm not saying that you should just go out to the corner and just throwing out cash to people that can use it irresponsibly. What I'm saying is there's an opportunity for Christians to say, I'm going to live generously with those who have less than I do because God has given me everything. And what he has given me, I'm going to share broadly in his name. And however their situation that they got in that, I want them to know that God loves them this day. So I'm going to give because generosity is an expectation for Christ. That people can get really weird when the church starts talking about money. One of the number one reasons people don't come to the church, come to a gathered worship service, is because they don't want the church to talk about money. But we don't even pass a plate at Salina First. We don't even really announce the offering. I drive a 2013 Chevy that's got a really weird shimmy going on in it right now. My clothes are from Kohl's. And so if you're like, man, they're laying it on with the money thing. What? Like what you give is between you and the Lord, but I want you to see that Jesus directly talks about generosity. He talks about money a ton in the New Testament, and there's a reason why, because he says, I don't want you to miss your reward. So why are we preaching on it today? Because I don't want you to miss your reward, which is our last point. There is earthly and eternal reward in following Jesus Christ. To being obedient to him, not just in terms of generosity, but in all areas of life, we reap blessing. Now, you might have heard prosperity preachers before say, so when you give, God's going to give back to you. I want you to sow a faith seed, and God's going to give you a new job or a raise or all that stuff. That is complete hogwash. But the idea that God honors faithfulness is not. Maybe God will respond to your giving with more financially. But maybe he'll respond in spiritual blessing. Maybe you'll just be blessed with a great church family. Maybe you'll be blessed with things going well at home. Maybe you'll be blessed with a richer prayer life and more obedience to him. The blessings on this earth oftentimes aren't material, but rather are spiritual. But the ultimate blessing is being obedient to him and receiving our reward in heaven. Jesus tells his followers to beware of your heart, that your heart is sneaky. It's going to try and twist you. It's going to try and have you take glory for what I want to do through you. And Jesus says, beware of that. Be careful of that. Make sure your motivation is not the applause of men, because if it's the applause of men, you'll start chasing after the applause of men. But if it's built on me, you'll stick with me, whether they're booing you or applauding you. To live generously because you are not worried about what you have. You're worried about following